The starship Nebula Seeker cruised through the cosmic darkness, its sleek hull catching the faint glimmer of distant stars. Jackson Raines peered through the viewport, his eyes wide as saucers as he took in the sheer size of the vessel that was about to become his new home. This ship was a marvel of modern engineering, a floating metropolis designed to accommodate thousands of crew members from various species within the Galactic Union. As the shuttle docked, Jackson's heart pounded with excitement. At just 28, he was one of the youngest human engineers chosen for this top-tier research team. He'd worked his tail off to make it here, but a pesky doubt gnawed at him. Despite humans' rapid advancements in science and technology, they were still considered the new kids on the galactic playground. The airlock whooshed open, and Jackson stepped onto the main deck. A chorus of alien languages bombarded his ears as crew members of every imaginable species bustled about. He caught snippets of conversation in Galactic Standard, the Union's common tongue, but many spoke in their own languages. A towering Grogon, with 4 arms moving in flawless synchrony, accidentally bumped into Jackson. Its compound eyes narrowed, and it chittered, "Watch where you're going, Earthling," in Standard Galactic. Jackson bit his tongue to avoid snapping back. No need to make enemies on day 1. He straightened his uniform and headed to the central hub where new recruits were to report. The hub was a grand, circular chamber with a dome of transparent alloy offering a stunning view of space. Holographic displays danced with ship diagnostics and star charts. At the center of the hub stood a figure who made Jackson's breath hitch. Commander Terra, a striking Ziran with shimmering silver-blue skin, stood out among the crew. Her long black hair was pulled back into a severe braid, accentuating her sharp cheekbones and mesmerizing eyes, a swirling mix of deep purple and electric blue. As she gazed over the new arrivals, her voice, a deep melodious alto, cut through the din like a laser. "Welcome aboard the Nebula Seeker," she said, sending a shiver down Jackson's spine. "I'm Commander Terra of the Ziran. You're here because you're the best in your fields. But remember, your past accomplishments are just that, past. Here, you'll be pushed to your limits and beyond. The galaxy doesn't suffer fools or weaklings." Her gaze lingered on Jackson for a heartbeat longer, sending an electric jolt through him. "You've been assigned to your departments. Report to your section leaders immediately." The crowd dispersed, but Jackson found himself frozen in place. Terra's eyes narrowed as she approached him. "Is there a problem?" Jackson snapped to attention. "Raines, ma'am. Jackson Raines. Engineering Department." "Ah, yes, the human wunderkind," Terra said with a sarcastic edge. "I've read your file. Impressive for your species, I suppose. Don't let it go to your head. You've got a lot to prove here." Jackson bristled at the backhanded compliment but kept his voice steady. "I intend to, Commander. I'm not here to be a token human. I'm here to work." Terra's eyes flickered with something, surprise, perhaps, or respect, before her expression hardened again. "We'll see, Ensign Raines. Report to Chief Engineer Varnak and don't be late. I run a tight ship." With that, she turned on her heel and strode away, leaving Jackson to stare after her with a mix of frustration and fascination. The next few weeks were a blur as Jackson settled into his role. The engineering bay was a labyrinth of pulsating conduits and humming machinery, with alien tech far beyond anything he'd seen on Earth. But Jackson was adaptable. He dove into his work, determined to prove his worth. Chief Engineer Varnak, a gruff Valerian with iridescent scales and 6 limbs, initially eyed Jackson with skepticism. However, as days passed, even Varnak had to admit that Jackson was quick on the uptake. "Not bad, Raines," Varnak rumbled one day as they recalibrated the quantum drive. "For a mammal, you've got a decent handle on nonlinear physics." Jackson grinned at the backhanded compliment. "Thanks, Chief. I've been studying Ziran theoretical models in my off hours." "Fascinating stuff." Varnak's multifaceted eyes blinked in surprise. "Ziran physics? That's well beyond your species' current understanding." "Maybe," Jackson shrugged. "But I've always been a fast learner." Jackson noticed other crew members, particularly non-humans, watching him with curiosity or barely concealed disdain. He knew it was going to be a challenge. Humans were still seen as upstarts. One afternoon, as Jackson was elbow-deep in a malfunctioning plasma conduit, a shadow fell over him. He looked up to see Commander Terra towering above, arms crossed and expression unreadable. "Ensign Raines," she said coolly, I need a status update on the drive core modifications. Jackson scrambled to his feet, wiping his hands on a rag. Of course, Commander. We've increased efficiency by 12% and reduced power consumption by 8%. I'm working on a new algorithm that could push those numbers even higher. Terra raised an eyebrow, a flicker of interest crossing her face. Show me. Jackson pulled up a holographic display and began explaining his theory. As he spoke, he noticed something odd. Terra's usually sharp gaze seemed to glaze over. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if to clear it. Commander, are you all right? Jackson asked, concerned. Terra's eyes snapped back to his, and for a moment, Jackson could have sworn he saw a flash of hunger. It was gone in an instant, and he must have imagined it. I'm fine, Ensign, she said, her voice strained. Your work is adequate. Continue. She turned to leave, but as she did, Jackson felt a strange pressure in his head, a whisper of a thought that wasn't his own. Fascinating creature. Jackson blinked, startled. Had he imagined that too? In the days that followed, Terra's behavior grew increasingly odd. She seemed to be everywhere Jackson turned, her piercing eyes following his every move. Her usual icy demeanor thawed slightly, her voice softer when she spoke to him. The rest of the crew noticed too, whispering and casting curious glances. What did you do to get on the Ice Queen's good side? His bunkmate, a jovial Turellian named Zox, asked one night. Jackson shrugged, genuinely puzzled. Nothing. I'm just doing my job. Zox chuckled, his antenna twitching. Well, whatever it is, keep it up. It's like watching a glacier melt. But it wasn't just Terra's demeanor that was changing. Strange things began happening around the ship, gravity fluctuations in the corridors, unexplained equipment malfunctions, and most bizarrely, crew members reporting sudden intrusive thoughts. One evening in the mess hall, Jackson was sitting with Zox and a few other junior officers when suddenly, every piece of cutlery on their table levitated, hovered for a moment, and then clattered back down. What the hell was that? Jackson exclaimed, looking around wildly. Before anyone could answer, a wave of alien emotions crashed through Jackson's mind. Desire, frustration, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of need. Just as suddenly as it appeared, the sensation vanished. Jackson looked up to see Commander Terra standing in the doorway, her face pale and her eyes wide with shock. Their gazes locked, and Jackson knew with certainty that she was the source of the disturbance. Terra turned and fled, leaving behind a trail of confused and frightened crew members. The ship buzzed with rumors after that. Some said Terra was ill, others whispered about possession by some cosmic entity. Jackson threw himself into his work, trying to make sense of it all, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was at the center of whatever was happening to Terra. His suspicions were confirmed a week later during a crucial staff meeting. The senior officers gathered in the conference room to discuss the strange occurrences. Terra stood at the head of the table, looking more disheveled than Jackson had ever seen her. Her hair was coming loose from its braid, and a wild look gleamed in her eyes. We must maintain order, she was saying. These incidents are merely a result of passing through an unusual area of space. There's no cause for... She broke off suddenly, her eyes locking onto Jackson. The room seemed to tilt, and Jackson felt that alien presence in his mind again, stronger this time. A flood of thoughts surged through him. Want. Need. Must have. Terra's eyes widened as she realized what was happening. No, she whispered. Not now, not him. Suddenly, every object in the room that wasn't bolted down began to float. The other officers cried out in alarm, clinging to their chairs. Commander! Dr. Laxa, the chief medical officer, shouted. You must control yourself. But Terra seemed beyond hearing, her eyes fixed on Jackson, swirling with a tempest of emotion. The air crackled with energy, and Jackson felt himself being pulled toward her by an invisible force. Acting on instinct, Jackson reached out and grabbed Terra's hand. The moment their skin touched, the chaos ceased. Everything dropped back to the floor with a crash. Terra gasped, her eyes clearing as she stared at Jackson in shock. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Terra yanked her hand away and fled the room, leaving a stunned silence behind her as the other officers erupted into panic and discussion. Jackson stared at his hand, still tingling from the contact. What in the galaxy was going on? He didn't know it yet, but in that moment, everything had changed. The real adventure was just beginning. In the days following the incident, Jackson couldn't shake the memory of Tara's touch, the electric connection that surged between them. He tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to her mesmerizing eyes. The ship itself seemed to be reeling from the aftermath. Systems malfunctioned randomly, gravity shifted unpredictably, and crew members reported increasingly bizarre occurrences. Jackson found himself constantly on call, racing from one crisis to another. "Raines, Chief Engineer Varnak here," crackled over the comm. "We've got a problem in the quantum drive chamber." "Get down here, stat." Jackson sprinted through the corridors, dodging floating debris and confused crew members. He skidded into the drive chamber to find chaos, equipment whirling through the air caught in a localized gravity storm. At the center of it all stood Commander Tara, her eyes unfocused and her hair writhing as if alive. "Commander!" Jackson shouted, fighting against the pull of the vortex. "You need to stop this." Tara's gaze snapped to him, and the storm intensified. Jackson felt himself lifted off his feet, pulled inexorably toward her. "Stay back." Tara snarled, though fear tinged her voice. "I can't control it." Jackson reached out, fingers brushing against hers. The contact sent a shock through both of them. The gravity well collapsed, sending everything crashing to the floor. Tara stumbled, and Jackson caught her before she could fall. For a brief moment, she leaned into him, trembling. Then she stiffened and pushed him away. "This never happened," she hissed, straightening her uniform. "Return to your duties, Ensign." She stormed out, leaving Jackson to deal with the aftermath. As he helped Varnak and the others restore order in the drive chamber, Jackson's mind raced. What was happening to Tara, and why did he seem to be the only one who could calm her? Later that night, unable to sleep, Jackson found himself in the ship's library. He pored over everything he could find on Ziran physiology and culture, determined to unravel the mystery. One name caught his eye: Elis. He leaned in, reading intently. "Elis is a rare and dangerous condition affecting Ziran females," the text read. "Characterized by intense emotional and physiological changes, including loss of control over psionic abilities. If left untreated, Elis can lead to mental breakdown and even death." Jackson's blood ran cold. This had to be what was affecting Tara. But why now? And why did she react so strongly to him? He dug deeper, searching for any mention of treatment or cure. What he found made his jaw drop. The only known resolution for Elis was the completion of the sacred mating ritual with a compatible partner. However, Ziran cultural law dictated that only those who had passed the grueling Trials of Ascension could be considered worthy mates. Jackson was about to find out that navigating interstellar politics was about to become much more complicated. Jackson Raines felt like a cosmic pinball, bouncing from one crisis to another as the Nebula Seeker continued its voyage through the galaxy. The ship had calmed down after the recent disturbances, but the atmosphere remained charged with curiosity and unease. Jackson's reputation had skyrocketed. He was no longer just the new human engineer. He was now the human who could tame the Ice Queen's fury. As he worked through the intricate maze of conduits and circuits in the engineering bay, his thoughts kept drifting back to Commander Tara. The flicker of concern in her eyes, the electric connection between them, it all seemed like a fever dream. But the reality was undeniable. Tara was affected by Elis, and somehow he was involved. One morning, Jackson received a summons to report to Tara's office. He straightened his uniform, though he had to admit he wasn't entirely sure why he felt the need to look his best for the Ziran commander. He navigated the maze of hallways until he reached the commander's quarters, a sleek, minimalist space adorned with holographic art and ambient lighting. Jackson knocked and entered at Tara's curt, "Come in." The commander sat behind a desk, her expression inscrutable as usual. Her eyes, however, betrayed a flicker of the internal struggle she was facing. "Ensign Raines," Tara said, her voice a controlled blend of formality and strain. "Have a seat." Jackson sat across from her, feeling a mix of apprehension and curiosity. "Commander, you wanted to see me?" "Yes," Tara replied, her gaze steady. "We need to discuss your recent performance. Your work has been exemplary, but there's more at stake than you realize." Jackson nodded. "I'm ready to help in any way I can." Tara's eyes softened for a brief moment. "I believe you are. What you don't know is that the Elis condition is not only dangerous for me, it also poses a risk to the entire crew. The sacred mating ritual is the only known cure, but it requires a compatible partner who has passed the Trials of Ascension. Since you're, well, not exactly a Ziran, we'll need to find another solution. Jackson's heart raced. What does this have to do with me? Terra leaned forward. You've demonstrated an unusual connection to me. We need to explore this further. There's a chance that your presence here might be crucial to finding an alternative solution. Jackson's heart raced. What does this have to do with me? Terra leaned forward. You've demonstrated an unusual connection to me. We need to explore this further. There's a chance that your presence here might be crucial to finding an alternative solution. Jackson blinked. Are you saying I'm part of the solution to your condition? Terra gave a curt nod. Yes. But it's not as simple as it sounds. We need to understand why you have this connection and how it might be leveraged. Jackson swallowed hard. What does that involve? Terra's expression turned grave. It involves a series of trials, a Ziran tradition. They're designed to test the worthiness of a potential mate. If you're to be part of this, you'll need to undergo these trials. They're grueling and often dangerous, but they might provide the key to helping me. Jackson took a deep breath. I'll do it. Terra's eyes softened again, though her demeanor remained stern. You're brave. The trials will start tomorrow. Prepare yourself. As Jackson left Terra's quarters, he was hit by a flood of emotions, nervousness, determination, and a strange sense of responsibility. He knew this was going to be a challenge, but he also felt an odd sense of duty to see it through. The next day, Jackson found himself in a large, ceremonial chamber filled with Ziran symbols and artifacts. The room was packed with high-ranking Ziran officials, their eyes watching him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Commander Terra stood at the center, flanked by two Ziran dignitaries who would oversee the trials. The trials began with a series of mental and physical challenges, designed to test Jackson's endurance, intelligence, and emotional resilience. The first trial was a grueling endurance test, a race through a maze of shifting walls and obstacles. Jackson navigated the maze with surprising agility, pushing through exhaustion and frustration. His human determination and adaptability were put to the test, and he emerged victorious. The second trial was a test of intellect and strategy. Jackson was presented with complex alien technology and asked to solve a series of puzzles that required not just technical skill but also an understanding of Ziran culture. As he worked through the puzzles, he could feel the weight of the Ziran officials' expectations. Despite the pressure, Jackson managed to crack the codes and complete the tasks. The final trial was the most daunting, a test of emotional resilience. Jackson was placed in a simulation designed to evoke his deepest fears and anxieties. He faced scenarios that ranged from personal failures to the potential loss of the ship and crew. It was an exhausting and harrowing experience, but Jackson confronted his fears head-on, drawing strength from his resolve and his desire to help Terra. When the trials concluded, Jackson was left standing alone in the chamber, exhausted but triumphant. Terra approached him, her expression unreadable. "You've completed the trials with commendable results," she said. "Your performance has exceeded expectations." Jackson wiped sweat from his brow. "Thank you, Commander. What happens now?" Terra's gaze softened. "Now, we'll need to consult with the Ziran Council. They'll decide if your connection to me is indeed significant and whether we can proceed with an alternative to the sacred mating ritual." Jackson nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anticipation. "I'll be ready for whatever comes next." As Jackson left the chamber, he felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. The trials had tested his limits, but he knew the real challenge was yet to come. He hoped that his efforts would help Commander Terra and, by extension, the entire crew of the Nebula Seeker. Little did he know, the journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. In the quiet of his quarters, Jackson stared at the stars outside his window, pondering the strange twist of fate that had brought him to this moment. His role in the galaxy's grand tapestry was far from over, and the real adventure was only beginning. The days following Jackson's trials were a whirlwind of anticipation and uncertainty. As the Nebula Seeker glided through the stars, Jackson found himself in a state of perpetual waiting. The Ziran Council was deliberating, and the atmosphere on the ship was thick with speculation. Crew members whispered about Jackson's feats, their curiosity piqued by the human who had tackled Ziran trials and lived to tell the tale. Jackson was deep in the bowels of the engineering bay, tinkering with an outdated plasma conduit, his way of managing the stress and keeping his mind off the mounting tension. As he twisted a wrench, he felt a presence behind him and turned to see Tara, her usually rigid posture slightly relaxed. "Ensign Raines," she said, her tone softer than usual. "The Council has reached a decision. They would like to see you in the Council chamber immediately." Jackson wiped his hands on a rag and followed Tara through the winding corridors of the Nebula Seeker. They made their way to the Council chamber, a grand hall adorned with shimmering Ziran artifacts and bathed in soft, ambient light. The chamber was filled with Ziran dignitaries, their faces inscrutable as they awaited the arrival of Jackson and Tara. Jackson's heart pounded as he took his place before the Council. Tara stood beside him, her usual authoritative demeanor replaced with a subtle hint of anxiety. The Council members, their gazes intense and probing, were seated in a semicircle before him. At the center of the assembly was a tall, dignified figure, High Counselor Karanis, known for his wisdom and stern judgment. High Counselor Karanis cleared his throat, and the chamber fell silent. "Ensign Raines," he began, his voice echoing with authority, "you have undergone the Trials of Ascension, demonstrating remarkable endurance and intellect. The Council has deliberated extensively on your performance and its implications for the Ziran people." Jackson straightened, his pulse quickening. "Yes, Counselor," Karanis continued, "your trials have revealed an unusual and significant connection to Commander Tara. However, it is crucial to determine whether this connection is truly beneficial or merely coincidental. We must consider the ramifications for both your species and ours." A murmur of agreement rippled through the Council as Karanis continued. "We have decided to proceed with a series of additional evaluations. These will test the nature and extent of your bond with Commander Tara and explore whether it can serve as a viable alternative to the sacred mating ritual." Jackson glanced at Tara, whose eyes were fixed intently on Karanis. "What kind of evaluations are we talking about?" Karanis nodded. "The evaluations will involve various aspects of mental and emotional synchronization. They will be rigorous and will require full cooperation. Your progress in these evaluations will determine if we can proceed with an alternative solution for Commander Tara's condition." Jackson took a deep breath. "Understood, Counselor. I'm ready for whatever comes next." Karanis gave a slight nod. "Very well. You will begin the evaluations tomorrow. Prepare yourself." As Jackson and Tara left the Council chamber, Tara turned to him, her expression a mix of relief and apprehension. "Thank you for your continued commitment, Ensign Raines. The evaluations will be challenging, but I believe we have a chance to find a solution." Jackson nodded. "I'll do my best, Commander." The next day, Jackson and Tara reported to a specialized chamber designed for the evaluations. The room was filled with an array of advanced Ziran technology, including devices that looked like they belonged in a sci-fi movie. At the center was a complex apparatus that resembled a cross between a neural interface and a meditation pod. "Welcome to the Synchronization Chamber," Tara explained. "This is where we'll conduct the evaluations. The apparatus will measure the depth and nature of our connection and assess its potential for resolving the Alice condition." Jackson took a deep breath as he approached the apparatus. "What should I expect?" Tara's expression grew serious. "The process will involve both mental and emotional synchronization. We'll need to be completely in tune with each other's thoughts and feelings. It can be intense and disorienting, but it's necessary for the Council's assessment." Jackson nodded, steeling himself for the experience. He and Tara positioned themselves within the apparatus, which began to hum softly as it activated. As the synchronization process commenced, Jackson felt a strange tingling sensation in his mind. Images and emotions began to blur together, creating a kaleidoscope of sensations. At first, the experience was overwhelming. Jackson was bombarded with flashes of Tara's memories, her childhood, her training, her fears and hopes. It was as if he were experiencing her life from the inside out. He felt her struggle with Alice, the isolation, and the desperate longing for a solution. As the synchronization deepened, Jackson began to see patterns emerging in the chaos. He could feel Tara's emotional landscape more clearly and sense the subtle connections between their thoughts. It was both intimate and disorienting, a profound connection that transcended words. The process continued for hours, with Jackson and Tara navigating a complex web of shared emotions and thoughts. The apparatus emitted pulses of energy, aligning their neural patterns and enhancing the connection. Jackson could feel his own thoughts intertwining with Terra's, creating a bond that was both exhilarating and exhausting. When the synchronization process finally ended, Jackson and Terra emerged from the chamber, their faces pale and drained. The council members were waiting for them, their expressions solemn. High Counselor Karanis stepped forward. The evaluations have been completed. The results are promising. Your connection to Commander Terra is indeed significant and could potentially serve as an alternative to the sacred mating ritual. Jackson and Terra exchanged a look of relief. Karanis continued, however, there is still much work to be done. We must explore the practical implications of this connection and ensure that it can be harnessed effectively. The next phase will involve further research and experimentation. Jackson nodded. I'm ready to proceed. Terra's eyes softened with gratitude. Thank you, Ensign Raines. Your willingness to undertake these trials has given us hope. As Jackson left the chamber, he felt a sense of accomplishment but also a growing awareness of the challenges ahead. The journey was far from over, and the stakes were high. But with each step, he was drawing closer to finding a solution for Terra and, in the process, uncovering the depths of his own capabilities. The stars outside the window seemed to shine a little brighter as Jackson prepared for the next phase of their journey. The real adventure was only beginning, and he was determined to see it through to the end.